The moment I heard the champagne glasses clink, I knew something was wrong. Not the normal kind of wrong. Not a dropped fork or a spilled drink. The kind of wrong that sits in your stomach like a stone. The kind you've been trained to ignore your whole life because making a scene was always worse than swallowing the pain. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old. I own a 2-bedroom condo on the 14th floor of a building downtown. I run a team of 11 people at a logistics firm, and until last Saturday, I still showed up every time my family called. Every single time. That's over now. Let me tell you why. My sister Diane is 28. She is beautiful in the way that gets you out of traffic tickets and into sold-out restaurants without a reservation. Growing up, she was the one our mother pointed to when she talked about her children to other people. Diane got the lead in the school play. Diane was voted homecoming queen. Diane just got engaged to a wonderful man. I was the one who helped Diane memorize her lines, drove her to practice when mom was busy, and sat in the third row clapping the loudest. I didn't resent her for it. I want to make that clear. Diane and I aren't enemies. We're not even close, not really. But she never went out of her way to hurt me. She just accepted what was handed to her, the way you accept a gift without asking where it came from. Our parents, on the other hand, that's a different story. My father managed a regional supply chain operation for 20 years before taking early retirement. My mother never worked outside the home. They are comfortable, not wealthy, but comfortable enough that money was never the issue. The issue was always something else, something harder to name. When I was 16, I asked my father if I could go to an engineering summer program 3 states away. It cost $1,200, and I had saved up $800 from babysitting. I needed $300 more. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses and said, "That's a lot of money, Rachel." 2 weeks later, I watched him write a check for Diane's cheerleading competition trip to Florida without hesitating for a single second. I got a part-time job at a diner and paid for the program myself. When I graduated college, my parents came to the ceremony, took a few photos, and left early because Diane had a bridal expo she wanted to attend. I stood in my cap and gown in the parking lot, watching their car pull away, and told myself it was fine. I had my degree. I had myself. That was enough. I kept telling myself that for 12 years. I built a career. I worked 70-hour weeks in my mid-20s, lived on instant noodles, and paid off my student loans in 4 years. I got promoted twice before I turned 30. When the condo went on the market, I bought it. I furnished it slowly, one piece at a time, choosing things I actually liked instead of things that were just cheap and available. It became the first place in my life that felt completely mine. I didn't advertise any of this to my family, not out of shame, but because I had learned early that sharing good news with them was a complicated exercise. My mother had a way of receiving information about my life that made it sound like a problem. A condo downtown? Those buildings have such thin walls. A promotion? You worked too much, Rachel. That's why you're still single. I stopped volunteering details a long time ago. I answered questions when asked, kept it brief, and changed the subject. So when Diane announced her engagement to Marcus last spring, I did what I always do. I showed up. I brought a nice bottle of wine. I hugged her and said congratulations, and I meant it because I did. Marcus is a decent person. He works in real estate. He's kind to waitstaff, and he genuinely makes my sister laugh. I have no complaints about Marcus. The planning started immediately. My mother threw herself into it with a kind of energy I had never seen her apply to anything in my lifetime. Venue research, caterer tastings, florist consultations, dress shopping. It consumed every family conversation for 6 months, which was fine. Weddings are a big deal. I understood that. What I didn't understand was when I became the primary funding source. It started small. My mother mentioned casually at a Sunday dinner that the photographer they really wanted was a little over budget. She looked at me while she said it. I wrote a check for $1,500 and told myself it was a gift. Then there was the florist upgrade. They found someone so much more talented, but the difference is $2,200. She looked at me again. Then the cake. Then the rehearsal dinner venue. Then the bridesmaids' dresses. Diane wanted a specific designer, and since I was a bridesmaid, wouldn't it make sense for me to cover my own dress plus help with the others? By the time the wedding was 3 weeks away, I had contributed just over $11,000. I had never been formally asked. It was always presented as a situation, not a request. A problem that existed and that I was apparently the solution to. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself this was what family did. I told myself a lot of things. The wedding was held at a country estate about 40 minutes outside the city. 70 guests, string lights, a string quartet during cocktail hour. It was genuinely beautiful. I will give my mother that. She has excellent taste and she executed the vision perfectly. I wore my bridesmaid dress, a deep burgundy that I actually liked, and I stood up there next to Diane while she cried happy tears saying her vows, and I thought, okay, this is worth it. She's happy. That's what matters. The reception started well. Dinner was served, the toasts were made. The first dance happened. I drank 1 glass of wine slowly because I had driven myself and I had an hour's drive home. I talked to my Aunt Carol, who I genuinely like, and to a few of Diane's friends from college who were easy company. It was during the second round of dancing that my mother appeared at my elbow. She had that look on her face, the one I recognized from childhood. The one that meant she had decided something and was now informing me of it rather than asking. "Your father and I want to make an announcement," she said almost too casually. "What kind of announcement?" "About a gift. For Diane and Marcus." Something moved in my chest. Not quite a warning. Not quite dread. "What gift?" she smiled. "We want to give them a real start. They've been looking at apartments, but everything decent in this city is so expensive, and you—" She paused, tilting her head slightly, the way she always did when she was about to say something she knew was unreasonable. "You have that extra space." I stared at her. "Your second bedroom," she said. "You barely use it, you're there alone." "But that's not what I mean, really." She folded her hands together. "Your place is perfect for them. 2 bedrooms, downtown location, move-in ready. You could stay with us while they get settled and then, Mom." My voice came out very flat. "Are you asking me to give Diane and Marcus my condo?" "Not give. It would stay in the family." "That is giving. That is giving. That is literally giving them my home." She waved a hand. "You're so practical about everything, Rachel. You always land on your feet." Diane needs stability right now. She's starting a new chapter. I bought that condo. I saved for it for 6 years. I pay the mortgage every month. And you can do it again. You're capable. She said it the way people say it when they mean it as an insult. You're capable, so your needs don't count. I told her no. Clearly, without raising my voice, I said, "I'm not doing that, Mom. That's not something I'm willing to discuss." I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 20 minutes later, my father tapped his champagne glass and the room went quiet. I was standing near the back, near the bar, and I felt the back of my neck go cold. He smiled at the room, thanked everyone for coming, said a few warm words about Marcus. Then he said that he and my wife, he always said, my wife in speeches, never her name, a quirk I'd noticed since childhood, wanted to share some exciting news. "We'd like to announce," he said, "that Rachel has generously agreed to gift her downtown condo to Diane and Marcus as a wedding present, giving them the perfect home to begin their life together." 70 people turned to look at me. I heard applause start, scattered at first, then fuller, as people smiled and clapped and looked at me like I had done something wonderful. I hadn't agreed to anything. He knew I hadn't agreed. My mother was standing 10 feet away looking at her hands. I walked to the front of the room. I didn't run. I didn't shake. I put one foot in front of the other, and I crossed that dance floor and I stood next to my father, and I looked out at all those faces, and I said, clearly and calmly into the microphone he was still holding, "I appreciate the kind words, but there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't agreed to give anyone my home. I worked for that condo for 6 years and it isn't going anywhere. I wish Diane and Marcus a wonderful life together, and I genuinely mean that. But I need to correct the record. The room went very quiet. My mother was at my side in seconds. "How dare you?" she hissed. "In front of everyone? You announced something I never agreed to," I said. "In front of everyone. You're embarrassing this family. You put me in this position." And then her hand came across my face. Not a slap in the movies, graceful and cinematic. A real one. Hard. The kind that snaps your head sideways and rings in your ears and leaves a mark. My earring, a small gold hoop I'd had for years, went flying and clicked against the floor somewhere near the cake table. The room made a sound. A collective inhale. I stood there for a moment. My cheek was hot. My ears were still ringing. I was aware of 70 people watching me, and I thought, very clearly, do not cry. Not here. Not for this. I bent down and picked up my earring. I put it in my purse. I looked at my mother, who was standing with her hands still raised in her face, going from fury to something that might have been fear, and I said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "That was a mistake." I walked out. Not storming. Not running. Walking, the way you leave a meeting that has concluded. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 4 minutes. My hands were steady. I was almost surprised by that. I called my attorney. Not a friend who happens to be a lawyer. My actual attorney, a woman named Sandra who I had retained 2 years ago when I was navigating a contract dispute at work, and who I had kept on retainer since because I learned early that having a lawyer you trust is not paranoia. It's preparation. I explained what had happened in about 90 seconds. She asked 2 questions. I answered them. She said, "Give me until tomorrow morning." I drove home. I poured myself a glass of water. Not wine, water. And I sat on my couch in my condo, on the 14th floor, with the city laid out in front of me, and I let myself feel it. Not the embarrassment. Not the anger, exactly. The grief. The specific grief of watching your parents choose again and again the version of your family where you don't fully count. The grief of having given $11,000 and 3 decades of patience, and still being told your home was theirs to give away. I let myself feel it for about an hour, then I went to bed. Sandra called me at 8 the next morning. What I hadn't known, what I had never thought to verify, was that my parents had taken out a personal loan 2 years ago using my father's retirement accounts as collateral. And they had listed my condo as an asset in supporting documentation, not legally, not with my signature. But they had presented it in a way that a lender had accepted, apparently without rigorous verification, and the loan was now past due. The lender had been sending collection notices to my father's address for 4 months. My parents had not just wanted to give Diane my condo, they had, in some capacity, already tried to leverage it. The wedding announcement was not a spontaneous gesture. It was an attempt to make the transfer look voluntary and documented before the situation became legally complicated. Sandra began drafting a formal cease and desist and notifying the lender of the unauthorized use of my property in their documentation. She also sent a letter to my parents outlining the potential legal exposure they were facing and making clear that any further representation of my condo as a family asset would result in immediate legal action. My father called me 4 times that day. I didn't answer. My mother sent a text that said, "You're tearing this family apart over a piece of real estate." I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made coffee. Diane called that evening. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me. She was quiet for a moment when I answered. Then she said, "I didn't know about the loan. I want you to know that. I didn't know any of it." I believed her. I still do. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry about the announcement. I'm sorry about the announcement. I'm sorry about..." She stopped. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I know." There was a long pause. "Are you okay?" she asked. And I realized, sitting there in my condo, that I was not happy, not uninjured, but okay in a way that felt different from before, like something that had been pressing on my chest for a long time had finally been named and set down. "I'm working on it," I told her. "I have not spoken to my parents since. My attorney is handling the financial and legal piece, and I have been advised not to engage directly until it's resolved. My father's former employer, he had done some consulting work for them since retirement, received an inquiry from Sandra's office as part of the documentation process. I won't say more than that, except that my father received an uncomfortable phone call that same week. I didn't arrange it. It was a consequence of paperwork, not revenge. But I won't pretend it didn't feel like something settling back into alignment. My condo is still mine. It will remain mine. I've been thinking about what I would say to someone who finds themselves in a version of this story, and I keep coming back to something simple. The people who call you capable and independent as reasons why you don't deserve support. They're not wrong about you. You are capable. You are independent. You built those things yourself, in spite of them, not because of them. That's yours. They don't get credit for it and they don't get the reward. You are allowed to love your family and refuse to be consumed by them. Those two things are not contradictions. My cheek healed in a few days. The rest is taking longer. But I'm not in a hurry. I have a condo on the 14th floor with a city view and a door that locks from the inside. And for the first time in 32 years, I don't owe anyone the key. Before I go, I want to hear from you. If you've ever had someone try to take something you earned, something that was yours, how did you handle it? Drop it in the comments. And if this story hit close to home, you know what to do. Subscribe, because I have more, and you're going to want to be here for them. Thank you for listening. You deserve to be seen, not just when it's convenient for someone else. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I let my father finish his toast, smile at the applause, and spend the drive home convincing myself it wasn't that bad. I know that version well. I lived it for 32 years. What I've come to understand is that the life you accept by staying silent is the life you're choosing, not the life that was forced on you, the one you agreed to by not pushing back. Every time I wrote a check without being asked, every time I showed up and made things easier for people who never once asked if it was hard for me, every time I told myself that being capable meant I didn't need anything in return. Those weren't just moments of generosity. They were agreements. And agreements, even unspoken ones, teach people what they can expect from you. Rachel didn't lose her condo because her parents were cruel, though what they did was cruel. She almost lost it because she had spent years showing them that her boundaries were negotiable, that her discomfort was manageable, that she would absorb the costs of their choices and keep going. She had been so determined to prove she didn't need them that she never stopped to examine what she was still giving them: her money, her patience, her silence, her willingness to make their problems disappear. The slap was the moment the pattern became impossible to ignore, not because physical harm is required before you're allowed to say enough, it never is, but because it stripped away the last fiction that things were fine. Sometimes it takes something undeniable to make you stop renegotiating with yourself. What followed wasn't revenge in the way people usually mean the word. Rachel didn't set out to hurt anyone. She called her attorney because that was the intelligent thing to do when someone attempts to leverage your property without your consent. The consequences that followed, the uncomfortable phone calls, the legal letters, the exposure of what her parents had actually been doing, those weren't punishments she designed. They were the natural result of choices catching up with the people who made them. That's not karma in any mystical sense. It's just cause and effect, playing out on its own timeline. The real lesson I carry from this isn't about standing up to toxic family, though that matters. It's about the relationship between intelligence and self-respect. Being smart enough to build a career, buy a home, and manage a team means nothing if you haven't developed the wisdom to recognize when you're being used. Capability without discernment is just a resource waiting to be extracted. The strongest thing Rachel did wasn't confronting her father at the microphone, though that took real courage. It was deciding, quietly and without drama, that she was worth protecting. That the same energy she applied to her career and her finances and her home deserved to be applied to herself. You can love people and still refuse to fund their decisions. You can grieve a family that failed you and still not go back. You can be the capable one and also be the one who says, "Not this time, not anymore, not at my expense." The condo is still hers. So is everything else she built. That was always the point.